You're a trailblazer in the equestrian world, and you've helped change the way that riders approach and manage performance anxiety when riding. I know we have a lot of readers out there, so get your notebooks out, because Dr. Edgette has written 2 books. One is called Heads Up, Practical Sports Psychology for Riders, their families, and their trainers. And the other is called The Rider's Edge, Overcoming the Psychological Challenges of Riding. And we can dig into those topics in our conversation today. And Dr. Edgette also served as a sports psychology consultant for Practical Horseman magazine, and she wrote a monthly column there on sports psychology for 8 years. There's also a recent Chronicle of the Horse article that I encourage all of you to check out called When Affirmations Aren't Enough. And of course, this expertise in equestrian sports comes with a background in equestrian sports. So Dr. Edgette grew up as a very competitive junior rider in New York and continues to ride today. And that's the best that I can do in terms of being brief. There's a lot. But Dr. Edgette, I would love for you to add some color to that bio and to your background and dig into that a little bit. And then let's start there. And then we can go from there and dive into some questions that people have sent ahead of time.
Okay, terrific. So, and please call me Janet. I'm not all that formal, but so my beginning in sports psychology began around the time that I began my work in clinical psychology, which was the late 80s. And I just gotten my degree. I had returned to riding after, I don't know, like a 18-year hiatus. And so was back in the show ring. And as I was riding and showing, I was really realizing how much thinking I was doing about preparing myself for the show ring, the anxiety that I experienced, how I was managing to deal with that. And so I thought, well, let me blend these 2 areas. And I started working with riders in this area. At the time, sports psychology, there wasn't a whole lot of it, especially for riders. And a lot of what was being done was pretty elementary. It was a lot about relaxation or visualization, breathing exercises and things like that. And I really wanted to move it forward from those areas into others. And so I developed a model of working with riders that I felt aligned better with our natural nature as human beings. Because I think when we start to pretend or try and convince ourselves that something's not true that is, or when we try and fake what we're thinking about, what we're feeling, or we try and deny that we feel anxious and try and convince ourselves and know we're really confident, all that stuff to me feels disrespectful to oneself. It's, first of all, the larger part of you always knows what's true, kind of like trying to give yourself a surprise party, so I wanted to do something that was a little different. And so I developed a model. And in this model, just to summarize it, it's really these elements. One is to figure out how your, let's say, performance anxiety, how that affects your riding, how that changes your riding. And secondly, to figure out how you can compensate for how that changes your riding. In other words, people are looking to be relaxed, and that's just not going to happen because kind of it's the price of doing business. If you're competing and you're hungry and you're really spending a lot of time preparing for your horses, you're not going to be relaxed. And the thing is, you don't have to be. It's really not that important. What you want to be is not relaxed, but you want to be able to execute. You want to be active, you want to be intentional, and you want to be workmanlike. So those are the values, those are the states of mind that I tend to work around rather than worrying about relaxation. Because if you try and get relaxed, I mean, you're kind of playing a whack-a-mole game in your head all the time. It's just always popping up. And actually, I'll tell you a story about that. My best lesson in sports psychology came when I was 11 years old. And I had probably just started riding. It actually has nothing to do with riding at all. It has to do with a sleepover at my best friend's house. Her name was Kathy. And at that time, I would get very, very homesick. And I never was able to sleep over at anyone's house successfully. So, 9, 10 o'clock at night, my mom would get a call. Hi, Mrs. Sasson, can you come get Janet? She wants to go home. Okay, fine. My mom would come and get me. Everything was great. Kathy was very popular in 5th grade, and I was very not popular in 5th grade. So I thought, all right, like I really want to be friends with her. She invited me to sleep over. I was determined to do it. She had a pony in her backyard. She had an adorable older brother. I said, all right, this is happening. So I went to Kathy's house and I knocked on the front door. My mom was with me. I'll never forget it. Whereas all the other mothers would usher me into their homes and they'd say, oh, Janet, you're going to have a great time. You're going to have the best time here tonight. You're not going to get homesick. You're going to have a great time. And then I would walk around all night saying, I can't get homesick. And of course I would. Kathy's mother was brilliant. She whisked me inside. She goes, everyone's in the back over there. And within earshot of my mother said, you know what, Mrs. Sasson, we probably don't even need to bother saying goodbye because I'll probably see you in a few hours anyway. And I thought, wow, this was the first person to ever give me permission to be homesick. She wasn't making it a problem. She wasn't telling me I wasn't going to have it. She wasn't saying anything other than, yeah, you get homesick. You'll probably get homesick tonight. We'll see your mom in a few hours. No big deal. In the meantime, have a great time. And I thought, wow, you know, the idea of not fighting what you really feel was phenomenal. And not only that, the idea is that, Janet, you could be homesick and still have a good time tonight. And so when I move that forward a couple of decades, I'm thinking, yeah, you know what? You could be anxious and you could still ride well. Because when you start to muscle anxiety around, it just gets bigger and it puffs up and it becomes this bully. And, you know, it's just rarely is it helpful to go that route. Kathy's mother was a brilliant sports psychologist, and, you know, I'll never forget it. It was just a great lesson. Really terrific. And so, of course, I stayed over that whole night. I never got homesick. I marched around her house the whole night saying, I can get homesick anytime I want to. I could get homesick right now. I could get homesick in an hour. I could get homesick anytime, and it's okay. And because I knew I could, I didn't. And that was the brilliant in Kathy's mother. It was great.
It is brilliant. Permission to feel the way that you feel. I can understand why it wouldn't escalate so severely. Like, you could apply this to anything. And we have people, I didn't even know that people could send emoji reactions while we're talking, but we have the mind blown emoji reactions coming in already, which is great. And I'm excited to take this approach that you're describing and dig into some of these questions so we can see like how you put it into practice. So the first kind of category of questions that I got from people were around making mistakes and letting people down. So maybe I could start anywhere. Let's start with a question that I got on Instagram. I told people that these would all be anonymous. So these will be anonymous questions. One of the questions I got is, sometimes I avoid trying bigger fences because I'm afraid of making mistakes. What's your suggestion for a rider like me?
So, okay. So first of all, making mistakes is one of the most common things that people come to me for. We're all afraid to make mistakes. Usually that means missing distances. Could mean a lot of other things, but when people worry about that, it's usually I'm going to miss, and it's going to be ugly, and I'm going to get hurt maybe, and so forth. So one thing here, I'm going to separate out two things for this person who's asking the question. One is the idea of making a mistake and finding a way to expand your margin for error. You're going to make mistakes. The only way not to is to stay where you are. And I guess in a sense it's already happening because the person's not raising their fences. Okay, they're staying where they are. So you stay there because you know you do it well and it's fun to do things well. So you stay there. But being able to say, yes, I can go forward. Yes, I might make a mistake. I mean, we could all say that. Nobody loves it. I mean, everybody hates it. That's the thing. Everybody hates making a mistake. And you feel like everyone is watching and you think, my gosh, you know, I work hard and my trainer works so hard for me. And if I make a mistake at a horse show, then I'm letting them down and disappointing them. Or with younger kids, my parents spend so much money on these ponies and I'm going to go in there, and if I do badly, they're going to get mad or they're going to be disappointed. Rarely does that ever happen, but it doesn't mean it's not the drama in that kid's or that rider's head, okay, that they're going to disappoint. So you may disappoint, you may not. You can't control that, but you can begin to find a way to tolerate your mistakes. It's little, it's gradual. over time. But the avoiding them just compounds the problem. Now, part B of this, and then I'll circle back to the first part again, but part B is anxiety about raising the fences because you might make a mistake. Usually when fences get raised, people do make mistakes because they're thinking about it, right? And when you're thinking about, I don't want to make a mistake here because it's a little bigger and the stakes are higher, that alone breaks the integrity of your automatic, rhythmic rock. You already have something in your mind. So chances are you are going to make mistakes. That's, again, the price of doing business. But I would want to make sure that your horse is capable of doing it, because you want to make sure you have a horse whose scope is enough to get you out of trouble when you miss. Because I think a rider has to know that they can miss and they'll be safe. It'll be ugly, but you'll get to the other side. So you always want to make sure you're not at that top, of your horse's abilities or your horse's worries about fences. They might be too careful and they get anxious. But the thing is, you're going to have some misses. Do you have a horse that's able to, chip and, you bury them and they get out of it, or you leave it out, it's gappy and they land and they're okay? Because if that's the case, then you're free on your end to go ahead and begin to practice at this next level and make your mistakes and say, I hate it, but this is the only way for me to move forward. And my horse is not going to get hurt. I'm not going to get hurt. We're safe. So those things have to, that has to be in place. The mistakes things is huge. I mean, they can even, well, with any disciplines, there's no magic bullet to that. There's no magic answer. It's really, and here's another thing. We talk a lot about show anxiety, performance anxiety. One thing we don't talk enough about are the emotional skills that are involved in becoming a good rider, becoming a better rider. There's a ton of them. There's being coachable. There's being patient. There's tolerating frustration without acting out, without having to, punish your trainer, your horse in any way. And there is also the tolerance for mistake. That is a mental skill, because if you don't have that developed, you're going to get stuck and you're going to have so much anxiety over making mistakes that it will slow you down. The ability to tolerate mistakes is one of the emotional skills that I think is really critical in being a rider, just like not being defensive when people are telling you things like a trainer. So that's another way to look at it, not so much like I need a magic bullet so I don't worry about making mistakes, but I need to develop this skill, much like I developed an educated hand or an educated eye or a deep seat. It's a developmental process, and you learn to tolerate it. And of course, ironically, when you're not worrying about making mistakes, guess what happens? You go back to your natural way of riding and you tend not to make them so much.
It's so interesting. It goes back to Kathy's mom's approach. If you're not focusing too much on it. And
you can see, that's the thing. It's like you can make mistakes and still ride well. It's just a mistake. It's not a statement about riding at any given time. It's a time-limited action that nobody really remembers but you could say that and people still worry about that. But it's time, it's not a state. A lot of the anxiety about mistakes has to do with the meaning that somebody makes of it. If I make a mistake, it means I'm not ready to move up to this level. Well, not necessarily. If I make a mistake, my trainer is going to be really mad that she spent all this time, extra time this week. Well, maybe not. If I make a mistake, it means I'm not as good a rider as I thought I was. Well, it's the meaning that causes the problem versus if I make a mistake, I'll hate it, but I'm okay with it. There's a big difference.
It's interesting that you say that, because so Kinsey and I have spoken to, like hundreds of hours at this point to Ride IQ members, many of whom are adult amateur riders. And Kinsey and I come together and debrief, what did you hear? What did you hear? And one of the things that we hear and learn is that people use their riding as a reflection for their personal growth. So what you're saying in terms of taking this mistake and then defining yourself by it, it kind of lines up with that. Because if you see, if you use your performance on your horse as a way to reflect whether you're doing well or not, which it can be a really positive thing, but if that's how you use it and you make a mistake, right, it could work against you.
Right. Well, it's interesting because, the dealing with mistakes is one of the ways in which I think this sport stretches people. Okay. We come to the sport with different personality traits. Uh, for a lot of riders, there's perfectionism, there's wish to control. Okay. There's the anxiety about making mistakes. All those things we're able in our regular life, okay, work, family, often able to get life, meaning family, workplace, to accommodate to us. So the perfectionist really doesn't ever have to grapple with his or her perfectionism because she's constructed a life where it works. Okay, it's adaptive, and maybe the family, accommodates to it. Same thing with control, same thing with making mistakes. Somebody who moves through their life and orchestrates it so that they make very, very few mistakes. Okay, they come to riding, and riding doesn't care. Horses don't care. So these things that you're able to manage on the outside, suddenly people are really stuck. Like, whoa, my perfectionism is really holding me back here. Okay, my wish to control is keeping me from moving forward. My fear of making mistakes, wow, I didn't realize I worry about it that much. It's really holding me back. And they have to stretch and learn, again, to tolerate that, or learn to tolerate imperfection, or use it as a cue that the riding is going to change. So it's just one of the beautiful things about this sport. You come to it, we come to it with our full selves, and it shapes us in some ways to be a bigger human being in some ways, with some of these qualities that we're able to make other people adjust to outside of riding, but not in barn so much.
I just want to touch on something you just said. Did you say use imperfection as a cue that our riding is going to change?
Yes. Yep. I did. Yeah. Perfectionism is one of those things that looks a lot better on paper than in real life, right? I mean, sound great. I want to be perfect. I want to do things perfectly, but it just strangles people like ivy. It's just awful. So one of the things I do is I talk about it as a cue. So in the same way that a rider's anxiety, let's say about performing, showing, okay, is going to affect their riding, I will ask my riders, like, okay, how does it change your riding? You're either going to override or you're going to underride. Overriding is a person who, when they get anxious, they get impulsive, they make these big moves, kick and grab and yank, or they get impulsive, they go for that big gappy distance, and then, not good, that kind of rider. The other way that anxiety can affect a rider is to underride. This is me. I underride. I'm a little too cautious. I'm a little too careful. I might break up my horse's stride. I might get stuck in a corner. This is what happens. So what I do is I know if I'm nervous, which is pretty much any horse show, I know my natural tendency is to underride. So I have to compensate for that by being a little bit more assertive. I'm going to say aggressive in the best sense of the word, in athletic sense. I have to be a little bit extra. I have to come in the ring a little bit extra. So if I like my canter starting out, I know it's not enough. If I'm thinking, oh, this is a nice, sweet canter, I do the jumpers. It's a nice, sweet canter, but it's not going to get the job done. That's how I under. So I know I got to curve forward to that pace that feels like everything's going to come really quickly, but that's the only pace that's going to get the job done. So that's my cue. And that's how I compensate, because I'm not going to be able to make myself not be nervous for the horse show. It's just, I'm just wired that way. But I can compensate for how it changes me. So yes, the same thing with perfectionism. The question for a rider to ask himself is, how do I ride differently when I start thinking about being perfect? What changes in my ride? Do I get impulsive? Do I override? Do I underride? Do I, space out? Do I get too bossy? Do I defer and let my horse make all the decisions? All these are ways that anxiety affects riders. And so if you can select the way that it affects you and then comment, I know when I'm anxious, I tend to defer to my horse. I don't want to make any decisions. So I can't get rid of anxiety, but I can remember that I need to execute. I need to be the boss. And that's something you can control. Anxiety, not so much, or relaxing, not so much. But I can control my intention to go in that ring and execute. And that's how people manage to be anxious and still ride anyway. So I tell people all the time, show nerves are only a problem if you think you should be having them. then they become.
Yes, then that's a problem. That's so interesting and actionable. And I mean, you're answering questions as we go here that came in. I know you mentioned like spacing out as one of the things that could happen. That was one of the questions that I saw today. So I'm going over to Facebook now, to the private Facebook group, to take some questions from there. The first one I'm taking is from Ashley, and I'm going to read through it. It's about a paragraph. So Ashley said that she's not able to be here, so that's why she's sending this ahead of time. She said she's really interested in strategies to reaffirm trust in yourself and your knowledge or skills. So Ashley is a psychologist, and she says she has a host of cognitive behavioral skills, but she's found that it's a lot easier to convince other people to use them than it is to use them on herself. And then she asks, what are some ways to manage doubts when rationally, you have the skills and abilities to do the thing because you've done the things dozens of times before? That anxious voice can just be really mean sometimes. That's
right. That's the question.
That's
right,
it.
Okay, so my thoughts about doubts and what people call negative thoughts is a little different from a lot of the mainstream work that's done in the industry. So sometimes people say, I have these negative thoughts and I want to get rid of them because I don't like them. And I say, well, tell me a little bit more. And it turns out that what was the negative thought was actually just really good judgment. Like, no, we're really not ready for this. So I never want to jump on board that, train to say, let's get rid of all the negative thoughts, because sometimes that's what's keeping somebody safe. Somebody who feels they need to push on, having this nagging doubt. I don't know, maybe I should wait a little bit. Or somebody, and I've had people come and ask me to help them not be anxious and get rid of the negative thought about riding this young, barely broken stallion. And I'm like, are you crazy? Like, I'm not touching that. No, that negative thought, that's a really good negative thought. It's like good judgment. So being able to discern what's a negative thought as in a doubt that's not rational and what's good judgment is important. Okay. That being said, back to Ashley's question directly, doubts are kind of like anxiety. If you go up against them, they're just going to dig in more deeply. So if you try and say, I just did this Tuesday, I should be able to do it today because it's Thursday, but you find that you're nervous about it, my question always is, talk to me about what's different. And even if you can't find the reason, it doesn't matter. The point is that you don't feel as confident today as you did on Tuesday. So rather than trying to convince yourself of something, I would go with that. I would say, for some reason, your body feels different. Your mind is different. The footing is different. Your horse feels different. There's so many moving parts in this sport that I think we need to give ourselves a little break when we do something and accomplish something and then expect ourselves to be able to replicate that every single time afterward. Because the learning curve, it's, if you look at a graph close up, the dots are above and below and above and below and above and below. And that's kind of how riding works. A good lesson, a not so good, a really good, a not so good one, a good, it's never quite like that. What I hear Ashley saying is that she doesn't believe the doubts have any validity, that, she's done it for whatever reason. And the doubt is just this lingering thing that's kind of a pain in the neck and she wants to get rid of it. I think if you start to bat it away, it becomes like, the little bully in the classroom, like, okay, now, I'm coming back. We got us a fight here. So I would say, what is different about the days where you feel the doubt? And does the doubt have to do with her? And does the doubt have to do with your horse? Does the doubt have to do with, like, for some people, they can do a beautiful round at home schooling with their trainer there. But if there's not a trainer there, they just don't feel as solid. And so they start to equivocate, and then they start to get indecisive. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, it's the same thing I did yesterday, but today I missed all the distances and I added and it was just horrible. Why? Well, maybe there's something about having your trainer there, even if she didn't say anything during your round, that allows you to feel more confident, just having that person there. So there are different things that make it feel different at different days. I wouldn't fight it. I would say, for whatever reason, I'm doubting this today. Okay, you don't have to do this today. Now, I'm not talking to Ashley. If we were one-on-one, I would find out more if this is really interfering with her long-term progress, or it's just something she's wrestling with temporarily. All this sort of takes us on different tracks. But I'm not somebody who fights against our natural inclination, what we think, what we feel. And I don't think that just because we say something to ourselves over and over again is going to make it true. I'm more inclined to say, if this is how I'm feeling, there's some reason for it somewhere, even if I don't know what it is. We're not, see, there's something besides like logic, methodical logic of rational thinking, A, B, C. There's an emotional logic. There's a whole world of emotional logic that we operate under, and we don't often know the reasons why we feel something or do something or don't do something, but there's always a reason, and it always makes sense at somewhere in that person's psyche. It makes sense to do the thing they're doing or to not do what they're not doing. So I always respect that and try and figure out what that is. I hope that is helpful.
Yeah, I find this very fascinating, and it's not intuitive, because there's a reason that people are trying to relax or not have doubts, and going right at the thing. So it's not right away intuitive, but as you describe it, I'm like right there with you. Like it seems to make a lot of sense. So thank you for getting me there. The next question is from Mickey this is a question that came ahead of time. I don't know if Mickey's here, but if you are, hi, Mickey. Mickey said, I would love to hear Janet's perspective and tips for regaining confidence after an injury or illness-related layoff. She said, I'm on the struggle bus. And I just reading that, I'm like, I've heard this 100 times from members. So I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in this response.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy to answer this question or discuss it. Okay, so people recovering from some kind of injury or a fall, like something bad happened, often will feel bad about themselves that they are coming back to the sport with not the same confidence that they had, before the injury. And then they start calling themselves names. Oh my God, I'm such a chicken. I'm such a baby. I can't believe it. I won't even, canter, just because he bolted the last time and took off with me and I got smashed into the wall. Why should I fear canter? Well, you have a good reason. But here's the thing. You're not a baby and nobody's a chicken. And when our brain is saying to us anxiety, and when we're fearful and we feel it, again, I respect whatever we feel. And I don't think that it's good practice to try and override that. Okay, and override that and push through it. People say, I'm just going to push through it. I know if I just keep going to the barn every day, and one of these days I'll feel like cantering again, or trotting again, or going cross country again. I just keep at it. And my answer is no, don't do that. Don't do that. Because you know what happens? That's the person who calls me 2 months later and says, you know what? I'm having panic attacks in the driveway on the way to the barn. I can't even get there anymore. Okay. The anxiety starts backing up. All of a sudden, it's panic attack in the driveway. It's an anxiety attack at home. It's like, oh, it's a little cold today. I don't feel like riding. Because it's a horrible feeling riding when you're afraid and your stomach's in your throat. I've been there. It's awful. Okay. Even if it's not that severe. I think people do best. Oh, and think about it. We don't do it to horses. Okay, let's say we're bringing along a young jumper and had a bit of a, ugly fence, maybe a little bit of a crash through. We don't put the fence back up and just make them come down to it over and over again. We take down the back rail. We make it a little more attractive, make it simpler. We back it down, and only when we feel the horse is like, okay, I got this, then we build back up again. And it should be the same with us. So I ask riders, tell me, what are the circumstances under which you would actually feel really comfortable riding again? And they're like, And I say, I mean, literally, like really, where you would have no anxiety. Would it be something like, it's summer, your horse was trained out all night, somebody already rode him earlier in the day, you're in the indoor, your trainer's there, the area of that ring is cordoned off, and you're on a lunge line. Yeah, that would work for me, person will say. That would work. I'd feel okay. Okay, well, then that's where you start. Now, I'm a little tongue-in-cheek here, but I am serious about helping somebody determine what are the conditions under which they'd feel comfortable riding again, because that's the way to go back to it. If you try and go back to it when you're uncomfortable and fearful, it usually just gets worse. Not only that, you're not riding well because you don't have your faculties. I mean, you're so anxious, you can't retrieve the natural resources in your athletic library to ride problems that come up. Okay, so you're not riding very safely, you're not riding well. But if maybe you don't need that whole package, with the trainer or lunch line, but maybe you say, you know what, I think if I ride in the indoor and it's only part of the ring and I don't canter, I think that that I actually want to do. Good, and you do there. I always am encouraging people to ride when they're hungry. They should be hungry for what they're doing and not bump it up until they're hungry for the next thing. Okay. And now this gets tricky sometimes because trainers are like, come on, you've been trotting for like 2 weeks now. Like, go ahead and canter. If that brings up anxiety in the person, then let's figure out what is it about the canter. It's for some people, it's just that initial lift of the shoulder and down. They're like, once I'm cantering, I'm fine. But it's the departure that freaks me out a little bit. Or for somebody else, it's the horse, they get more and more downhill as they go. It's different things. So it's not that they can't canter at all, that they have to work through little pieces of it. But the main thing there that I want to communicate is for people to respect what they're feeling, to come back slowly. You will get back to where you are if you respect what you're feeling and put the pieces in place to get back there gradually. Hopefully your trainer
What was the last part?
I was just saying, hopefully your trainer understands and is patient, because that's, sometimes they're like, come on, let's go.
Yeah, it's so true. A great and considerate trainer who's there to support you is really a gift. I love, love, love the comparison you made about taking down the back rail for a horse, because we wouldn't think twice about that. Of course, you would give your horse that consideration, and you wouldn't think any less of your horse. You wouldn't think he's not brave. You think he's figuring it out, and you're giving him space to do that. But it is so interesting that it's hard to apply those same concepts to ourselves sometime. That would be a story that I would go back to give myself permission to, do what you're describing here, like find the scenario that you're comfortable in.
I will add one more thing to that, Jessa, and it's this. Sometimes part of the problem in being able to move forward with the riding and the fear and anxiety that's generated is because people are overmounted. I see it so often. Horse looks, here's another P word that causes trouble. Okay, perfectionism is a P word that causes a lot of trouble. The other one is potential. This horse has so much potential. And so people buy younger, too young, or too big, or too forceful, or too something in the blank. And they bring this horse home and they can't ride it, or they try and ride it and they're just overfaced. But they try and ride it because they really like the horse, or, it's not easy to turn around and say, I think I bought the wrong one. So they try and ride it. And sometimes it's a matter of being very honest with yourself and maybe having an honest conversation with your trainer. Sometimes the trainer wants you on that horse because they're looking at you 3 years down the pike, but are you going to get there? Can you bring that horse along to get to where it really depends. But being very honest with oneself, is this a suitable mount? Am I enjoying riding? Do I look forward to going to the barn? Is this what I'm in this sport for? Those are really hard questions, but I've seen too many people leave the sport or end up just being para riders. They groom their horse. The horse is beautiful, but it's on cross ties all the time and somebody else rides. And I don't know, it's tough. I understand how one can get in that situation. But it's hard to overcome if you're really overmounted. I mean, there's only so much lunging and turnout and trainer rides you can do before it's like, I can't ride this horse well or safely.
This is the beauty. This whole conversation has been the beauty of being able to speak to you with both a sports psychology background and an equestrian background, because there are so many dynamics. Like being
Mhm.
overmounted is one of them.
Yeah.
And there, for anybody listening, there are a number of hack chats by coaches on Ride IQ that are talking about like how to find the horse that's right for you. And it might not be the horse that you are like getting heart eyes over because
Mhm.
um because
Right.
you know that's easy to happen, to see the scopy or fancy or whatever it is that you're like being drawn toward is it's yeah, like you're
Mhm.
saying, it's just not always the best fit. um
Mhm.
okay,
Right. I
there's
mean,
another question. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say this whole sport is very seductive. I mean, it seduces people into it who have no business. We not the money, not the time, but they're in. Because it's like I'm locked in and I'm never going to leave the sport because I don't know. Yeah, it's a whole other conversation. What draw? It's so compelling. Um, but so people get into it, and then so part of that whole glamour and the compelling quality of the sport in itself is how people end up overmounted because the beautiful horse and does well. It's very beautiful and very seductive line of thinking. So that's how people get in trouble very easily. It's totally understandable, but it's not fun. So
That's really
anyway.
interesting. We have a question that came in live on Facebook. This one's from Krista. Krista, we're glad you could make it. And thank you, Krista, for your question. Thank you, everyone who has sent in
Mhm.
questions. Like, you guys make these such valuable conversations. I wouldn't be able to come up with these thoughtful questions you all supply us. So, Krista's question starts with a description. So she said, "My mental game is poor with my cross country riding right now. I'm trying to be a leader for my horse, but sometimes I get absolutely irrational fears and somehow it transmits to the horse and there's a stop." She said there's
Mhm.
a saying, fake it till you make it. And then she asked, can you fake it for a horse? Like, can you fake out your horse?
Yeah, so great. That's a great last question, last part of that question. I don't think so. Horses, like children, animals, they see and hear and know everything. Yeah, I mean, for many reasons, I would say a different course of action is preferable to staying in where you're feeling uncomfortable and where you're trying to fake it till you make it. Because I don't even know how you do that. If I'm ever doing something that feels a little too much for me, I feel it. I feel it in my stomach and then it travels in my throat. And then it's like, ugh, it just feels horrible. So, again, you could stick affirmations on Post-its all around your bathroom mirror, but the bottom line, telling yourself you're really confident, you're really confident. But again, if you're not, you're not. And I remember one person, I will get back to the question, one person I worked with once came in and she said, I had Post-its all over my house. I was confident, everything great. And then I got to the show and I went in for my test. And all of a sudden, like, it was a house of cards and it collapsed on her just as she was walking in the ring because it's tenuous. You don't feel it. How are you going to hold it? Anxiety is very robust. It's very robust. It punches right through all the Post-its for many people. So I don't think that's helpful tack, especially because you're talking about cross-country fences and where you could get hurt if you're not self-assessing accurately. That's not necessarily a safe thing. Of course, it's more true as you get to the upper levels, but I always encourage my riders to have a very accurate read on their ability and their horse's ability. Okay. Because if you're thinking maybe we're not ready, or we were ready last week, or the horse is ready, but I'm not, or I'm ready, but the horse is not, back it down. I think the best way to move forward is to back it down to a place where you're comfortable. So take it down to the next level. And if you're comfortable there, you will begin to give that confident ride back to your horse who's probably missing it and needs it. And so once you show up again and your horse is like, okay, there you are. And okay, now we're a package and now we got this thing and we're doing it. Then you gradually reintroduce the next level, little by little. But I would not recommend faking it till you make it. I would say, acknowledge that something is not helping you to feel on your game with whatever you're doing, back it down a little bit. When you feel comfortable again, then come back up again. I think it's a much safer and much more pleasant way to ride.
It sounds fun too to back it off and feel like your most confident, capable self. Even if you're
Absolutely.
capable at the level that you're having challenges at, and it's the confidence getting in the way, it sounds really fun to like just take on something. You're like, I can do this.
I can do this, and I enjoy doing this. I wasn't enjoying doing the other thing, and that's the thing. I mean, you made a really good point, Jessica. It's, you can be competent at that upper level. You can be totally confident on a different horse, with a different trainer, on a different course, on a different day, on a different fill in the blank. Okay. But if that day you're not feeling it, then don't try and just back it down. And it's like, okay, I like this. This feels good. And then you'll get there, sometime in the future, for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And Krista just commented, she said, thank you. That makes sense. All right. Up next. And I don't always rapid fire like this, Janet, but we have so much interest. I hope that people are also gathering, like, whatever you're feeling, you are not alone. If anybody can tell you that, it's Janet. But I can also tell you that based on looking at like how many times tracks are listened to on Ride IQ, when we're tackling things like performance anxiety or fear or getting back into riding, everything that we've talked about today and everything that Janet teaches around, listens are through the roof. So you're in good company, and this is something that we're all navigating. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Next question. I love this next question because this again is something that comes up a lot. It's around focus and being present. This is from Sarah. She said, do you have any tips on how to be present while riding, especially at competitions? She said, one of my biggest struggles is comparing bad past experiences with what is about to happen. For instance, thinking I fell off at a jump that's similar to that one last time, so this isn't going to go well again. She said she's jinxing herself. And then she said she's really happy that we're having you on Ask an Expert tonight.
That's nice. Thank you so much. So I love talking about presence. It's sometimes hard for people to value it because it's not something you do. It's something you are. It just is. It's not something you do. And I think in our society, we value things that you can do, right? We don't always value things that just are. So it looks like you're doing nothing when you're actually very, very present. And the best definition I ever heard of being present was a colleague of mine who years ago was describing to me that morning, she was talking with her 5-year-old son. And she said, as she was listening to him talk, she could like count his eyelashes. She was that, I don't mean proximity wise, but she was that present and in his face or his space that she could count his eyelashes. And I just thought that was beautiful because when you're that present, you're just 100% there. Now, yeah, you can't be 100% there with your horse because you have to attend to a lot of different things when you're riding. But presence is important. So let's redefine it a little bit. The problem with what this person is experiencing, okay, in terms of, I remember the last time I did this fence, I had a problem, is very similar to some of the struggles people have when they try and use visualization. Okay. Because what you're doing is you're comparing your present experience with something else. With her, she's comparing it to a prior ride. For someone, visualize. And I'm not saying don't do it. If this is something that works, by all means, continue doing it. But for some people, what happens is they get so caught up riding the horse that's in their head, or the one they were fantasizing about the night before in their visualization, or the one that they rode yesterday, or the one they would like to have, that they're no longer riding the horse underneath them. And that's the one you have to ride. And you have to be there every step of the way. So the presence is what would help. And what's this rider's name? I forgot. You had mentioned it. The person's.
This is Sarah. Oh,
Sarah, okay.
Let me double check. Yep, Sarah.
Right. So Sarah, it's a matter of like I would go for asking somebody, where do you find yourself most present? Where are you best able to be fully present? And somebody might say, actually in this setting, when I'm feeling this way under these circumstances. So, okay, so you can capture that experience of being present, and then think about how can you bring that forward when you're riding. What do you need to do? Well, part of it is not thinking about the past or the future, okay? But it's easier said than done, because you see the oxer, the red oxer, and you think, oh, that's okay. But part of it is letting it go. It's like, you know, this is a different time. Even if it's something that you say to yourself, like, this is different, okay? You can't prevent yourself from having the thought you don't want, like that red oxer is one last time, blah, blah, blah. But you can say, that was last time. You can have a motto. You can have something that you say to move it out of the way. And maybe it'll come back again, and that's fine. And then you move, that was last time, this is now. That was last year, this is now. Something that breaks and divides past and present and keeps you back, and this is now. And with now, maybe you look at your horse's ears, or you pay attention to where your lower leg is on your horse. Anything that gives you some, you know, tactile, you know, immediate tactile sensation of being present on your horse. It could be what you see, okay, looking at his ears. It could be feeling them underneath you. It could be anything that brings you right here in this very immediate way. And you don't hold on to it, because you try and hold on to it and then it just dissipates. It comes and goes. Let it come and go. I'm present right now. And then like, oh, wait, I'm not anymore. Okay. And you come back to it. You don't try and force it. You don't try and manhandle it. You just, oh, there I was again, off and wherever, right back here, right back here. And maybe it's even talking to your horse. Whatever it would be that would help, you know, Sarah or anybody else stay connected to the animal and sensing everything about them, what their walk is feeling like, what they're sounding like, anything that connects to the right here, right now. That's present, and that's really what you want to be, where you want to be. I hope that
I think it helps a lot. Anybody in the chat, I know Kyle Carter serendipitously hopped on as you were describing how to be present. And he's like, I'm not sure if you've already touched on this. And then he asked how to stay in the moment. So
right.
Kyle or anyone else watching, if you want to nudge on that topic, he goes, there we are, answering all my questions. But if anybody wants to nudge on that, I think that was a great description, but I know it's something that a lot of people deal with. So feel free to nudge in the chat and I will relay it. And then I also wanted to get to a question from Kara. Kara said, at home, our dressage tests feel like all the good things, like dancing with your favorite partner or a chance to show off how well we can work together. And at shows, even if I don't feel pressure, the adrenaline kicks in, the tunnel vision takes over, and all of a sudden I'm stiff and stuck and pushing and pulling in all the wrong ways. Kara, you're an amazing writer. I like just reading this. And then she said, do you have any suggestions on how to break the cycle in the moment that that's happening?
Okay, so this is what I would suggest to Kara. I would invite her to take a moment to think about how her show anxiety, in this case, changes her riding. Okay, she says she gets stiff. Okay, she locks up. There were some other terms in there, but basically we're talking about tunnel vision, right? Okay, tunnel vision, locking up, and stiff. This is how anxiety affects her riding. Okay, so now the question becomes, what can she do to compensate for some of that? The tunnel vision will set aside for a while, because that's a little harder. I remember working, well, there's a lot of people who get stiff and lock up and everything. And the two things that I've sometimes played around with, because sports psychology can be playful too, it doesn't have to be all serious, is to, do you remember in the movie Wizard of Oz, when at the very end Dorothy finally gets the oil and oils Tin Man and he starts to be able to move, right? And so there's this idea of, you know, what if somebody's just kind of imagining being drenched in oil, and, you know, that somebody's oiling them, and it's a little thing, but, you know, if it gets you a little bit more sort of shaken out of that lock, then fine. Another image, an image that could be really powerful, is a marionette, because if you think about a marionette, every body part is independent from the other. And we're talking about a rider who locks up, which means that her body is not independent. Her arms aren't independent from her shoulder, from her body. So, but in the marionette, everything's just kind of fluttering around. So, you know, for a second, can you become the marionette? And it'll shake it out. And then the lock will come back in because that's just the way we're wired. But for those few moments, you get a release from it. And then, you know, it's a matter of changing the figure ground. It's like most of the time you're locked up, but there are these few moments where you're not. And then you do more and more of that. And then suddenly, most of the time you're not. And then sometimes you lock up. And that's how you gradually move yourself into being able to manage it, not because you're any more relaxed, but because you're able to imagine some things that are symbolized a different way for the body to feel. Okay. The other thing that I would recommend is to pick one part of the body. So let's say this person gets locked up in their elbows, well, in their whole arm. You know, I'm making it up here because I don't know, but they're locked from wrist to elbow to shoulder. You know. So can they focus on just relaxing not relaxing, on sort of loosening that one part, just that one part? Because when we go in and say, oh my God, I'm so stiff, I'm locked up, I'm tunnel vision, I got to do everything. It's impossible to do that. You could pick one thing and maybe get a little better there, you know. With a tunnel vision, that's sort of a physiological response. It's, you know, that is sort of a dissociation from your surroundings, right? Can that person take a few moments? Can Kara take a few moments to ground herself in her immediate environment? Okay. Sometimes the tunnel vision can get broader if you think about, what else do I see? I got to look around. I got to literally look around and see the horse trailers over there, and literally look down and see my horse's braids, and literally feel my hands on the reins. And that kind of, you know, sensory experience can sometimes bring people out of that narrow tunnel vision.
It is so fun to watch you like pull these puzzles, or put these puzzles together, pull them apart, whatever it is, solve these puzzles. And Kara is here in the chat. Hi, Kara. Thank you for being here. I didn't know if she was or not, because this was a question that was ahead of time, but she said that she loves the Tin Man imagery. I loved that too. And you said it's like you just have oil, and I'm like, she's going to slip right off her horse. So don't visualize too hard, Kara.
You know, see, that's the thing. I think the playful element has not been included in sports psychology, and everyone gets very serious about it. And of course, because it's a serious business, and there's a lot of time, a lot of money, and it matters to us tremendously, and we really want to do well. But here's the best example of sports psychology I've ever heard, and I love it because it's elegant and it's natural, beautiful. Pat Matzdorf was a track and field star back in the 70s. In 1971, he won the world champion in the high jump. Okay. Now, he wasn't really expected to win. He was an outlier, but he won. So immediately after the event, he's got all these, you know, journalists and people with their microphones in his face. Oh, Pat Matzdorf, how'd you do this? What'd you do? You know, what'd you do differently? You training differently? No. You have a new trainer? No. You got special sneakers? No. And they're asking all this stuff. And finally, he just says, you know what? I woke up this morning and I didn't shave, and I felt mean. That's all it was. And I just love that. You know, he chose not to shave because being unshaven made him feel mean and, you know, implying a little aggressive. And that's all he needed. Beautiful, elegant, simple, and it worked. That's the magic of sports psychology. Can't always have it be like that, but when you can, it's really cool.
I love the thought behind that, and discovering what any individual, like discovering what my like cape equivalent would be, or like 5 o'clock shadow equivalent, or whatever it is. I have heard people talk similarly about like pulling their hockey helmet on, and they just like embrace the athlete. And
you know, a walkout song or something that just kind of, you know, consolidates everything and makes you feel, yeah, I'm ready. Bring it on. I'm ready.
You guys, we are definitely starting a thread on Facebook about what our walkout songs will be.
Oh my
No
gosh.
negotiation on that.
Yes.
We'll
Oh my
we'll
gosh.
share it with
Yes.
you, Janet. That is
Oh,
going to be
I wanna
amazing.
join in. Can I add to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
for sure. We'll get
Okay.
you in there.
All right.
Well, we're coming up on the hour. I have a final question for you. And it's not I'm not looking for blanket advice with this question. But Glennon Doyle is somebody whose podcast I listen to. She ends the podcast with like, what's one easy thing? She has a very catchy way of saying it, but like a very easy thing that you would recommend or encourage people to do. What would an easy thing be that you would recommend to riders that might make them feel just a little bit, whatever that is, happier, more confident, healthier? Do you have one easy thing that you'd recommend they do?
You know, here's something. Sometimes, during my career with riding, I've been in, I've been out, and been at different levels of it, been able to access it at different levels. Had struggles, horses that didn't work out, horses great. And the one thread through it all is I'm just glad I could be at the party. That's how I feel. I'm glad I could be at the party. I'm glad I could be doing this. And yeah, it's going to have days that aren't great and all that stuff, but I just feel so lucky that I can partake in this sport. And for me, that's, that sort of sets me back and it's like, okay, yeah, there's that. So I'm going to say that just maybe appreciating that you're at the party and you go with that. It's a good feeling.
I love that advice. I'm just happy to be here because it is what a gift.
Right?
Like we're here for a reason. That's beautiful advice. And with that, I would love to hear, we will put some resources in the episode notes. So we'll link to your books. We'll link to that recent Chronicle article. But are there other places that people should like follow you? Are you currently taking clients? Tell us where people can find you or contact you if you are taking clients.
Absolutely. Yes, I am taking clients. I'm in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but I work remotely for people out of the region. And I am on Instagram and I am on Twitter and I am on Facebook. Now, I do have 2 accounts for each because in addition to the sports psychology work, I also work with teenagers and their parents. A lot of my work is with families. So I have a separate Twitter, Instagram, Facebook for adolescent and family therapy. And then I have equestrian sports psychology. So those are the ones you want to plug into, and then you could reach me through there and follow me. And thank you for that.
Is a lot to manage. I'm like, I can't even manage my one, but I'm really glad that you do that. That's very helpful. We'll link to those as well so that everybody has them.
Absolutely.
And with that, this has been such a treat. Like I told you at the beginning, I've been so excited to get back to Ask an Expert, and there's no better conversation for me to just feel like heart is full. People feel like they are getting the support they need. So thank you again for spending the hour with us and just helping us through these things that can be like real game changers if people get some clarity around them or start to dip their toe into addressing them. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You are so very welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this conversation too.
I did too. Absolutely. And everyone who attended, thank you for